The war in heaven was fought with the Spirit, but the war of Armageddon will be fought with flesh, fire, and steel. The Book of War. Entry 1. Hi, my name is Joel. I'm not really sure how to keep a journal. This is sort of the first time I've ever done it, so bear with me. I'm Joel. Sorry, I already said that. Well, I don't really know where to begin. I guess about myself? Well, I'm dead. Sorta. I shot myself when I was 22. Sorry, Mom. But, I'm writing this, so I'm still kind of alive in a way. It was 2012 when I pulled the trigger, and I've met some people here who say they died in the 2040s and the 2050s, so I guess I'm in my 50s or 60s or something. I know, this is confusing. Tell me about it. I'm in hell. Literally. Not like a metaphor or anything. There's an afterlife after all, and, well, I'm in the shitty one, but I suppose I deserve it. I killed my friend. That's probably why I'm here. That's why I ended myself anyway. I don't want to talk about it too much, but I could have protected him. I could have saved him. I'm sorry, Mike. I'll always be sorry. You didn't deserve what happened to you. So anyway, hell. I don't really know which religion got it right, but the demons down here do mention Jesus at times, so I'm guessing that one of the Christians, they were the right ones. I haven't asked too many questions, so I don't know exactly who we're talking about, but I've just kind of been surviving since I've got here. It's not as bad as you think. Don't get me wrong. It sucks here. I wish I was alive again. I could have been a better person, not ended up here, but it's not the worst. There's no pit of fire, and you're not getting tortured forever. It's kind of like a bizarre parody of the world. The demons run everything, but there's a society down here. You have to get a job, eat, sleep, shave, shit, all the tedious things you had to do from before. So, I guess in a way this is torture. Capitalism, am I right? I don't have it too bad, though. Well, comparatively. Honestly, I've had some pretty great times here that I would never have gotten in life, so I can't knock it too hard. I mean, it's only been like 40 or something years, and it's forever, so it might get boring after a while, but so far, it's not the worst thing I could imagine. When you get born here, you wake up in these weird sacks buried in a mud field. You climb your way out of them, and then you're in this dark, endless plain of mud and freezing water that rises out of a huge black ocean. You either get found by the servant of some demon who takes you as a slave for his master back in the principalities, or you just wander around. If you don't get picked up as a slave, though, you'll either starve or freeze to death and then just wake up in the mud again. I've heard there's some clans of people that live permanently in the mudflats, though. They survive off of cannibalism and cooking people over fires made from driftwood of smashed ships. Personally, I've never run into these clans before, and I've died a fair few times here, so I can't say if they really exist or not, but they probably do. The mudflats are massive, after all. Anyway, who cares about that? I played football for my university before I came here, and I was a boxer, as a bit of a hobby, so I'm in good shape. When I got found the first time, they branded me, chained me, threw me on a ship, and dragged me back to Kallipolis, where I was sold to a guy named Tolmith. Well, not really a guy, a demon, but, whatever. Anyway, he lives in the city and owns a barracks of gladiators, which he enrolled me in pretty quick thanks to my size and my past of fighting. It's a pretty sweet existence, I'll admit, and it's more fun than I thought hell could be. Every time I win a big match for him, it's all the liquor I can drink, a great meal, and a couple of girls to take home with me. I don't want to jinx it, but I've got it pretty set down here. The downside is that it can hurt sometimes, fighting and all that. And they throw you against some pretty fucked up things in that arena. Not to mention I've gotten killed in the arena probably a dozen times, but I'm kind of used to dying now, so it's not too bad. It hurts my stats, though, and Tolmith always gets pissed when I die, says that it hurts my betting potential or something. It's funny. It's kind of like varsity sports in the arena with the way they work it. Oh, I forgot to mention. I guess Tolmith is powerful enough or whatever that when I die, I don't have to go through the whole mudflat thing. He just brings me back to life and patches me up with his powers or whatever, and I'm good to go. That's one thing about hell. If you get in good with one of these demons and you don't age. I feel strong, look great, and can kick ass like I'm 22 for the rest of eternity. Kind of sick, if I have to say so. Alright, yeah, I'm getting into this journaling thing. So anyway, Kallipolis. It's this huge city that's built against a massive cliff. Like, imagine the height of Niagara Falls, but like 4 or 5 times taller. It's that high. At the bottom of the cliffs is the harbor, where all the slave and trade ships come in. It's a pretty shit area, but it's got a few decent bars, so I'll go down there from time to time for a night off. Tolmith also likes to bring me around in his retinue now, since I'm a bit of a name in the arena, so I get to watch him at the auctions now and then. There's this massive silver tower that's built right into the sea and rises up into the sky for just forever. This thing is goddamn big. It's where the prince of the city, his name's Retep. It's where he lives. Never seen him. I guess he doesn't come out too much. Anywho, carved all along the side of the cliff face is the Undercity. It's where most of the poor people live. The Undercity stretches into the actual cliff for a while too. It's like an underground city, but before it becomes the Wormway. A bunch of tunnels and holes dug way into the cliff that's mostly just for runaway slaves and people who don't want to get found or bothered. Once you get to the top of the cliff, the city has 3 districts that form a half circle around the big tower. The Cathedral third, where the big church is, the Silver Way in the middle, and the Red Fence on the left. That's where I spend almost all of my time, is the Red Fence. Apparently, the name was originally the name for the wall around the district, and over time it just became the name of the whole place. The Red Fence is where the arenas are, and where Tolmith lives, which means it's where I live. So, when it comes to the arenas, there's a lot of them. I won't bother naming them all, they're basically all the same thing. Imagine one of those old Roman Colosseums, they're basically all just like that. Anyway, I don't really feel like writing much more, but I am enjoying this journaling thing. Might add it to my list of hobbies. A lot of time to kill, after all. Alright. Entry 2. This is a big fight for you. This is a big fight for me, too. Make sure you don't lose, Tolmith said, standing in the doorway of the room. I could see over his shoulder a crowd of attendants pressed close behind him. Tolmith, able to take any form he wished, was in his usual dress. He had the form of an extremely muscular man with deep blue skin. From the waist down, he had the legs of a goat, and from the waist up, a bare chest that rippled with deeply black tattoos that moved slowly and silently across his skin like living creatures. 2 curling ram horns crowned his head, and a river of black hair cascaded down his back. "Do I ever?" I asked with a smile. "Yes," he replied. I was being sarcastic. Don't worry, I got this. "Good. Bring me a win and you go up in the rankings. There's a hefty reward in it for you, too." He smiled, revealing a mouth of blindingly white teeth that were sharpened into points. "You should tone down the teeth brightness. Clashes with the rest of the outfit," I said as I wrapped my hands with bands of leather. Tolmith chuckled. "Lose the match and I'll make 'em brighter." "I gotta get ready. I'll see you in the ring," I said, waving him off with a hand. He nodded and turned. His attendants cleared a way for him, and the demon lumbered off, followed by his scuttering mob of followers. I was left in the room with my fight team. There was a woman whose tongue had been cut out for some reason. Young, fit, attractive. I was never told her name, so I usually just called her Girl, and she began to massage my shoulders. In the corner, the other attendant was sharpening and polishing my gear. "All right. Melchiades. You've never fought him before. Let's go down the record," my trainer said, standing in front of me with a clipboard. "Go." "He often fights with a spear and an off-handed dagger or sword. Little armor, relies on speed. Shorter and lighter than you, so he'll be fast. Your helmet is going to lose you some peripheral vision, so make sure you keep locked on him. If you can, close the distance between the two of you as soon as possible to make his spear useless. You have the shield, he probably won't. Barrel into him once you've got him cornered, and he'll go down. Clear?" The older man said. "Crystal, don't worry, I got this." I started. "Hurry up, I need my gear ready," I said to the boy working furiously at the grindstone in the corner. He looked up with a fearful face and took the sword from the stone, holding the handle up to me. I took it and gave it a few swings back and forth, felt satisfied, and then set it down on the table. The boy and the girl strapped me into my greaves and armored my sword arm. I took my helmet and placed it on my head, strapping it in place. I hefted the sword and shield and stepped out from the room. Torchlights flickered along the hallways as I walked, feet crunching against the sanded floor. I could hear all around me the sounds of other gladiators resting, training, or readying themselves for their fights that day. Above me I could hear the roar and the laughter of the crowd, who stamped their feet and hollered in response to whatever was happening in the ring. Followed by my trainer close at heel, I made my way to the assigned entrance for the ring. I could see now the light spilling in through the iron bars of the gate, and watched the attendants cleaning the arena, spreading fresh sand to cover the blood, and refilling the incense vats that burned constantly to cover the scent of rot. The gate in front of me opened up, and a pair of servants walked past carrying the battered corpse of a gladiator, apparently still alive but on the verge of dying. I saw the commotion in the arena die down, and one of the gate guards waved me forward. I stepped slowly into the arena, the lights and the crowd opening up before me, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as cheers began to ring out. I'll brag, I have a few fans now that I've been in the arena circuit long enough. "Spectators, one and all," cried the booming voice of the announcer. "Welcome! I hope you're enjoying the show. Next up, we have Tolmith's prize fighting bear, the menace of the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, Joel Fleming." The crowd cheered and applauded. I raised my sword above my head, pointing towards the sky. I scanned the crowd and found where Tolmith sat, clapping and eyeing me. I turned my sword and got down on one knee in his direction, planting the tip of the blade into the sand. I could hear some jeers and heckling from parts of the crowd, evidently the fans of Melchiades, but I didn't care. "Seeing as it's Mr. Fleming's first fight today, we'll ever so graciously give him 2 warm-up matches before his big event. If you need to fill your cups or your plates, now is the time." I stood, bouncing on my heels and rolling my shoulders, as I waited for the gate at the far end of the arena to open. When the game organizers sensed a lull in the spectators' attention, or when a fighter first entered the arena, they were always given warm-up matches. These things were barely a warm-up, and were more of a comic display for the spectators. Real fighters would get matched against opponents who had no chance in hell, pun intended, of winning, just so the audience would get a chance to see a bit more blood and guts before the real events began. The warm-up matches also served as a good opportunity for masters to ditch slaves they didn't want anymore, as the fighters sent as warm-ups always died. The far gate creaked open, and a man came tumbling into the arena. The crowd erupted in laughter as they watched a naked man, blindfolded, heft a huge, 2-handed sword onto his shoulders and try to give it a few futile swings. The man staggered under the weight of the blade, but was able to make it move at the very least. He tried to reach up and touch his blindfold. An attendant behind him immediately darted forward to whip him across the back, causing him to yelp and lurch forward, dropping the sword into the sand to the great amusement of the crowd. The man scrabbled in the sand to find the blade, and finally managed to pick it back up as I started to draw closer towards him. I made sure to grind my feet into the sand as I walked, giving off noise so he at least knew where I was. As I got closer, he began to swing the blade wildly back and forth, slashing at the air in the direction I was advancing from. I began to circle to his left, and he swung violently that way, almost sending himself off balance with the weight of the sword. The crowd started to yell, "He's over here!" from every direction, laughing as they tried to confuse him even further. While it was what they came for, I always felt bad killing the warm-ups, so I resolved to make it quick. As I stepped into the arc of his blade, he lunged forward, swinging wildly, and I backed away from the swing as the sword went wide and cut through the air. I lunged in and ducked my sword under his scrawny arms, planting it right into his stomach as I closed to embrace him in one final hug of death. The sword buried itself to the hilt, and I felt the tip skip off his spine as it cut through soft flesh. The man let out a moan against my shoulder, and the sword clattered to the ground, and he went limp in my arms. I backed off, pulling the sword free and letting him topple to the sand. The crowd laughed as they turned their attention back to their wine jugs and plates of treats. I felt the blood running down my chest, and an attendant ran over with a rag, allowing me to wipe my sword off. More servants carried off the body of the dead man, and one young boy came out to drag the man's fallen sword away. I stood, now in the center of the arena, waiting for whatever comic combatant they would throw at me next. The far gate creaked open again, and the crowd held their breath. Bounding out of the gate came 2 young girls, probably no more than 10 years old. The audience immediately let out a howl of laughter and a series of jeers. "They're not kids, they're adults. They're not kids, they're adults," I repeated to myself in my head. When you died and reincarnated in the mudflats, you came back as a baby and spent about 20 unconscious years in the mud growing back to adulthood. Some demons and people down here have proclivities, however, and will have people harvested from the flats before they're fully grown. They have the minds of adults. Hell, they were probably older than me, but they just happen to look like 10-year-olds. I always hated having to fight the kids, or at least these kid-like things, but I braced myself and ready to fight anyway. The two were dressed in small white tunics and carried nothing but knives. They split up and each one ran at me from a different side. Whoever these girls were, they seemed eager to just die and get it over with. They ran at me. I thrust my shield into the body of the one coming at me on my left, and with a ringing clang, she tumbled back into the sand. I wheeled about as the other came behind me, and thrust downwards, the sword biting into the girl's collarbone. She went limp, blood spurted up, and she breathed her last, falling into the sand. I turned to find the other girl now getting back to her feet, unsteady and obviously shaken from the blow of the shield. We locked eyes for a moment as she got back to her feet, and I saw in her eyes the experience of centuries, the eyes of a woman in the body of a little girl. She looked at me for a moment before she raised her knife and ran at me again. I pulled my arm back and swept it forward, taking her head off with a single fluid motion. The crowd roared, and attendants ran out. One of them grabbed the head and pranced around with it for a minute, holding it in front of his own face to the laughter of the audience, before he swung it around by the hair and sent it flying into the stands. The laughter redoubled. "All right, that should be enough to get the fires of today's fighter howling for blood. Let's bring on the main fight," the announcer roared from somewhere in the stands, and the crowd hollered before going quiet. The gate lurched open again, and Melchiades strode into the arena. He had tanned olive skin and handsome features. A mop of brown curls crowned his head, and he held his spear to the sky as he entered, receiving cheers from the whole audience. In his offhand he held a short dagger, quick and light, and he wore no armoring save for a set of leather pauldrons and a linen loincloth. He locked into me and nodded his head. I lifted my sword and returned the nod. "Begin!" the announcer yelled, and we both fell into fighting stances. A deep, booming drum beat rang out from the stands. They often played live music to accompany the fights, but drums were the most common. The audience began to shout and to holler as I walked towards my opponent. We approached one another and closed into a circle, the two of us slowly circling one another, eyeing one another up and looking for any sort of opening. Melchiades feinted towards me, jabbing his spear at my face. It didn't come close, but I whipped my shield up into place nonetheless. He was evidently testing my reflexes to see where he could come at me. Both he and I knew that unless I got close to him, I couldn't reach him, but I decided to do something he wouldn't expect, and I stopped in place, eyes fixed on his, face blank, refusing to make a movement, and standing behind my shield. He continued to circle me, and I turned to follow him as he walked. The drums beat on, the crowd murmured, trying to jeer at us enough that we would start fighting. I shut the world out, focusing on nothing but Melchiades in front of me. I could feel the hot, bloody sand under my feet, and could feel my heart thumping rapidly as the adrenaline coursed throughout my body. Melchiades smirked, stopped, and lunged at me again. It was wide, another glancing, searching thrust, but I put out my shield to keep it off nonetheless. He pulled back and with lightning speed, and flipped his spear so that he held it from below, holding it overhand. He tried to thrust over top of my shield at my face, but I punched the shield up and deflected it away. I had fallen for his trick. As soon as I had uncovered myself to block the spear, Melchiades flicked his hand and whipped the off-handed knife at me, which sunk into my thigh with a burning sting of pain. I grunted as the blade sank into my leg. I had had worse, but the stab was deep and would definitely slow me down. But I thanked my luck that he had missed my stomach. I had no doubt that Tolmouth was scowling at me from the stands, but I pushed the thought out of my mind. Melchiades had one less weapon to fight with now. The crowd went into an uproar as the dagger sank into me, and my opponent kept that shit-eating grin on his face, which I was now determined to wipe off. He fell back, now holding his spear with both hands. I dropped my wounded leg backwards, anchoring it in place and pivoting on my other foot to keep pace with my opponent as he began to circle me. He continued to dart in with probing strikes, waiting on me to make a mistake and expose myself to the spear. All he had to do was wait me out while my leg grew heavier and heavier. I couldn't move very fast or very well, and the dagger digging into my thigh was quickly sapping my strength. As luck would have it, Melchiades got impatient, and, following a feint towards my head, he quickly withdrew, jabbing at my feet, which were uncovered. The thrust would have connected, but I yanked my foot back and up, my wounded leg screaming with pain as it was forced to support the whole weight of my body. Ignoring it, I slammed my good foot down onto the haft of the spear, which Melchiades failed to pull back quick enough. It was too thick to break, but the force ripped it out of his fingers and threw him off balance, making him lilt forwards. I saw him wince at the knowledge that this tiny mistake had cost him the fight, before I slammed the bottom lip of my shield directly into the bridge of his nose. The bone broke with an all-too-familiar crunch, and his neck contorted strangely before he crumpled onto the ground. The crowd burst into cheers of applause and the bellowing of those who had made and lost money. He wasn't dead, but ranked fights were always to the death. I took 2 limping, awkward steps towards him and thrust my sword into his heart. He shuddered and went limp on the sand. "We have a winner!" the announcer roared. I left the sword in his chest, dropped my shield to the ground, and raised my fist to the sky. I caught the eyes of Tolmith, who was applauding and smiling at me from the stands, and I saluted him with a wave. Attendants rushed out to help me out of the arena and carry off the body. I limped my way back to my room, calf and ankle hot with blood, and each step sending an electric shock of pain up my leg. My team immediately handed me a cup of wine with lotus flower mixed in, and I drank, feeling the pain in my leg become a distant, dull ache that seemed as though it belonged to someone else's body. I sat, letting my servants pry the sweaty gear away from a body that didn't even look or feel like mine at this point. I watched as the trainer pulled the knife from my leg, blood spurting out in a fearsome eruption before a bandage was slapped down on top of the cut. My head lolled forward under the effects of the lotus, and I saw through the tops of my eyes when the looming figure of Tolmith entered into the room. "My boy, excellent job out there. Fantastic show. Now, as to that leg of yours, should I heal it myself or let it heal naturally as punishment for getting wounded?" the demon said with a deep laugh, evidently more excited over his gladiator winning than everything else. "He's under lotus, my lord," my trainer said. "The boy can't handle a knife in his thigh for 20 minutes? New arrivals to hell are always so soft. All right, I'll fix him." Tolmith rolled his eyes before he extended a hand lazily towards me. "He shall be sober and of sound body, so let it be done." I instantly sat upright as I felt the effects of the lotus fly out of my brain and body as though blown out by a breeze. I felt the flesh of my thigh stitch itself back to normal in the blink of an eye, and I lifted my head up to look at Tolmith directly. "Thank you," I said. "Don't mention it. Excellent work today," he said, waving a hand. "You and the rest of the fighters can take the night off. Go have fun." Myself and a couple of the other successful fighters from that day went out to one of the bars in the Red Fence district, a big, fancy place along one of the main streets. We couldn't afford to go out to a place like this very often, but our tabs were getting covered, so we leapt at the chance. We were sitting around a table, pretty drunk at that point, when one of my companions lurched out from the table as a stranger approached us. "He did it once and he'll do it again," my friend slurred. I turned and looked, and saw that the man who had approached us was none other than Melchiades, back on his feet and wearing a set of crisp, clean linens. I stood from the table, putting my hand on my friend's shoulder, and wobbled at the realization of how drunk I was. "Don't," I mumbled. "Gentlemen, I mean no harm," Melchiades said, grinning a broad, deceptive smile. "I have come to congratulate my opponent." He extended his hand towards me. I drunkenly eyed him up and down before I smiled and clasped his hand. "You're looking well." "Likewise. A few inches higher with that knife throw and our roles would be reversed, I imagine." "You should have let me tire myself out. I would have gone down if you just waited longer. Come and sit and drink with us," I said, pulling the man towards our table. I ordered a round of drinks for him, and the whole company toasted together. "I look forward to meeting you in the ring again. I promise I don't make the same mistake twice," Melchiades said, wiping the beer from his lips and breaking into another grin. Entry 3. I don't know if I want to keep journaling. It feels good to say this stuff, but today I feel empty. I mentioned it in my first entry. My friend Mike. We were best friends. Elementary school together, junior high, high school. I was even dating his older sister. We were out at the farm, all of us, messing around on ATVs. I dared him to jump his ATV off a ramp we'd built. Bang. Dead. 1 second laughing and flipping me off, the next second a neck wrenched to the side, and his sister letting out a scream I don't think I can forget. I remember his parents crying at the funeral. I remember the way everyone looked at me. They all said it wasn't my fault, but I knew what they were thinking. Things got bad, and as you know, they ended with a bullet in my head. Did you know you can actually feel the bullet for a split second? It's like your head is on fire and shoved inside a tornado with the amount of force your head gets kicked back with. Tolmith, look, I know he's a demon, and I shouldn't have expected anything good down here. You know, I probably deserve to be here, but they put me in another match. Nothing special, right? It wasn't ranked or anything, just the weekend entertainment where they throw a bunch of things and people into the ring to watch them kill each other. I walked into the arena and my warm-up fight walked out. It was Mike. I saw Tolmith in the stands howling with laughter as he talked to friends of his, all the while wiping tears of laughter away from his eyes. I did what I had to do. Do you want to know what he said? What he said? What Mike said as I was forced to repeat the greatest mistake of my entire life. He said, "I forgive you." Melchiades, I met him afterwards. We're kind of friends now. Or as close as you can get to friends down here. He told me that you just get used to it after a while. I don't know if I want to get used to it. The last time I killed Mike, I killed myself to make up for it, but now I can't even do that. There's nothing to do except get used to it.